The morning light crept reluctantly through the cream-colored curtains, which I hadn't changed in 15 years. I sat in my favorite chair, the one with the worn armrest that Joseph had wanted to throw away when he was alive. Now that he's been gone for 5 years, I cling to those old things tighter than I do to my own memories. In a house that is too big for one elderly woman, every item reminds me of the past. Sometimes I think things live longer than people. Glendale was never a big town, just a mid-sized town, not a backwater but not a metropolis. Joseph and I moved here in '78 when I first found out I was pregnant with Garland. Joseph said at the time, "Miriam, we need a house, a real home for our chick." He was always a romantic, my Joseph. We bought this lot when there was nothing here, a vacant lot on the outskirts, but overlooking a pond. People used to say, "Why would you want to live in the middle of nowhere?" But now this neighborhood is considered prestigious, and our house, which we built brick by brick, is worth a fortune. Joseph always had a way of looking ahead. I reached for my cup of tea, wincing at the pain in my joints. 68 years old is no joke, especially when you've worked as a florist all your life. Few people think about how physically demanding the job is. Constantly on your feet, hands in cold water, back bent over arrangements. But I loved my flowers. My floral fantasy was the most famous flower store in Greendale until I sold it 6 years ago. The phone rang, breaking the silence of the house. I took my time answering it. At my age, rushing doesn't do any good. The screen read Garland, my son, the only child who'd been a stranger to me since before his father died. "Yes, Garland," I answered, trying to keep my voice upbeat. "A maternal habit you can't break, even when your child is 40 years old." "Mom, listen, I'm busy right now." He sounded impatient as ever. "Tessa asked to stay with you this weekend. Can you pick her up Friday after school?" My heart trembled. Tessa, my granddaughter. A 12-year-old wonder with Joseph's eyes and my smile, as they say. The one person I still put up with Garland's coldness for. "Of course I'll take her. I don't have plans anyway." "Oh, great. Also, I need the deed to the house, the ones in the safe." I gripped the phone tighter. "Why do you need them?" "I just need them. For the bank." His answer was too quick, too sloppy. "What kind of documents, Garland?" "Everything, Mom. All the deeds to the house. And the car too, by the way." Something in his voice made me wary. I knew my son. In 40 years of motherhood, I'd learned every nuance of his lies. "I'll look into it," I said evasively. "I'm a little busy right now." "What could you be busy with?" He sounded irritated. "You've been sitting in this empty house all day. That's it." A jab he couldn't help but take. Garland always knew where to hit. "I have a checkup at the hospital tomorrow," I said calmly. "Scheduled." "Oh, right, your heart." He said it like I reminded him of the broken faucet in the kitchen. "Well, get well. So I'll pick up the paperwork next week?" "We'll see," I answered, and hung up before he could object. The house fell silent again. I rose slowly from my chair and walked to the window. Our garden, another of Joseph's creations, was a blaze of fall colors. The maple trees we'd planted when Garland turned 5 now towered over the roof of the house. I remembered Joseph holding his son's little hands as he helped him throw soil into the sapling hole. "This will be your tree, son. It will grow with you." Garland laughed and clapped his hands. Back then, he still knew how to rejoice in simple things. What had happened to that boy? When did he turn into this cold, calculating man for whom a mother was nothing more than an annoying duty? Maybe Joseph and I spoiled him too much. Maybe I clung to him too tightly after my husband died. I remembered trying to bond with my son after the funeral, calling every day, offering to help with little Tessa. At the time, Claire, his first wife, had just left him, leaving behind a 3-year-old daughter. Garland was furious, not that his wife had left him, but that he now had to be a single father. I took Tessa in for 6 months while he came to his senses. Those 6 months were the happiest of my life after Joseph died. And then Garland met Octavia, 8 years younger than him, an ambitious advertising executive. She disliked me immediately, and I admit I reciprocated. There was something about this woman that made me suspicious from day one. Maybe it was the way she looked at our house as if assessing its value, or the way she'd sidelined Tessa, even though she desperately needed a mother's love. I sighed and stepped away from the window. There were framed photos on the mantel, our family history and snapshots. Joseph on our wedding day, so young and handsome in his ridiculous 70s suit. Garland in his senior year of high school, serious beyond his years. Tessa on her 10th birthday, with a unicorn-shaped cake I'd baked myself. And another picture, taken a month before Joseph died. We were sitting in the garden, under that maple tree. He was already sick, but he was still holding on. That day he called me in for a serious talk. "Miriam," he said then, looking at me with his kind, tired eyes, "I have done something. For you and for Tessa." Joseph was always concerned about the future. He knew what our son had become. Knew that after he died, Garland might try to, well, do exactly what he seemed to be up to now. I walked over to the secretary in the corner of the living room, the same one Joseph had bought for our first wedding anniversary. My fingers fumbled for the hidden drawer, a little secret that only my husband and I knew about. Inside lay an envelope, sealed and untouched all these 5 years. "Open it when the time is right," Joseph said then. I didn't know exactly what was inside. Joseph had only hinted that it was the deeds to the house and some kind of will related to Tessa. "It's our insurance, Miriam, just in case Garland decides to pull something in his own way." I hadn't opened the envelope in all these years. I didn't want to think that my own son might. The phone rang again. This time it was the hospital, reminding me about tomorrow's checkup. I answered automatically that yes, I would be there at 9 in the morning. I hung up the phone and looked at the envelope again. Perhaps it was time to find out what was inside. But not today. Today I'll just hide it safely. Because my intuition, the same intuition that hadn't failed me in 68 years, told me that Garland was up to something. And it had to do with the house. I tucked the envelope into the bag I was going to take with me to the hospital. Tomorrow is just a routine checkup, nothing serious. The cardiologist says I have a great heart for my age. Strong, that's what he said last time. Well, he knows better. But it's strange that such a strong heart could be so sick because of my own child. I looked at my watch. It was time to pack. The hospital was on the other side of town, and I preferred to arrive early. I hated the rush and the hassle. As you get older, you start to appreciate calm and predictability. Maybe that's why young people annoy us old people so much, with their eternal hurry and desire to get everything here and now. I walked slowly up the stairs to my bedroom. Each step echoed with a familiar creak like the music of this old house. The house that Joseph and I had filled with love for 40 years. The house that Garland seems to want to take away from me. Well, my boy, your father was wiser than you think, and I may not be the helpless old woman you think I am. After packing a small bag with the necessary things for the hospital, I checked once more that the envelope was still there. Then I locked the house and went outside. The autumn wind was ruffling the leaves of the maple tree, a Garland tree that had long outgrown its owner. I wondered if it even remembered the day we planted it. As I got into the car, the old Ford that Joseph had bought the year before he died, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything. It was an irrational feeling, but at my age, you begin to trust such premonitions. I started the engine and slowly pulled onto the road leading to the hospital. Maybe it was time to open Joseph's envelope. Maybe it was time to show Garland that Mom wasn't just an old woman in an empty house. Hospital corridors have always made me wistful. Even in a decent medical center like Glendale Hospital, the walls are inevitably painted that peculiar pale green color that only hospitals seem to have. I sat on the edge of a couch covered in crisp paper and waited for Dr. Riley to return with the results of my tests. The exam had started at 9 in the morning, and for nearly 4 hours now, I'd been chased from one machine to the next. "You have to be careful at your age," Dr. Riley said with that special condescension that doctors reserve for older patients. As if I didn't know that at 68 years old, you have to watch your health. I straightened the folds in my blouse, a cotton blouse with a small floral pattern that I'd bought when Joseph was still alive. It's strange how, after the death of a loved one, you begin to measure time with before and after events. Before Joseph died, I loved bright colors. Afterward, my closet became as faded as these hospital walls. The office door opened and Dr. Riley walked in, this time with a smile that reassured me a little. Well, Mrs. Thorne, I have good news. Your heart is in excellent condition for a woman of your age. Your blood pressure's a little elevated, but nothing critical. So I'll live then? I asked with a degree of irony that only old people can afford. Dr. Riley grinned. Absolutely, and hopefully for a long time to come. But I'd like you to take a couple more tests, just as a precaution. He handed me a referral, which I folded neatly and tucked into my purse. Is that it? I asked, looking forward to going home, making tea, and maybe finally opening the envelope Joseph had left behind. Yes, that's all for today. Nurse Patricia will show you out. The results of these additional tests will be ready in a couple of days. We'll call you. He was about to leave when I decided to ask the question that had been on my mind all morning. Dr. Riley, what about guardianship? My health won't be a problem to get a guardianship? He turned around, raising his eyebrows in surprise. Guardianship? You're going to be a guardian? I nodded. To my granddaughter, Tessa. She has a complicated situation with her mother. The doctor thought for a moment. As far as I can tell, you're physically fit enough to care for the child. But this is a court decision, and there are a lot of factors to consider. Of course, I hastened to agree. I just wanted your professional judgment. He nodded and walked out, leaving me alone in the office. I slowly gathered my things, thinking about my upcoming conversation with Garland. I had to explain to him somehow why I was interested in Tessa's custody, and it would be even harder to explain why Joseph had left part of the house to his granddaughter instead of his son. The door opened again and the nurse came in, a young woman with kind eyes and a tired smile. Mrs. Thorne, are you ready? I'll walk you to the exit. I nodded and followed her through the maze of corridors. We were almost to the front desk when my phone rang. Garland's name popped up on the screen. Excuse me, I said to the nurse. I have to take this. It's my son. She smiled understandingly and stepped away, giving me privacy. I pressed the green button. Garland? Is something wrong? Instead of a greeting, he blurted out, I'm getting married tomorrow. Your car and house are sold. Goodbye. I froze, trying to comprehend his words. They sounded so absurd that for a moment I thought I had misheard him. What did you say? I asked him again, feeling a lump in my throat. You heard him. His voice was impatient. Octavia and I had decided to go ahead with the ceremony. And the house and the car. Well, you know they were deeded to me after my father died. That was a lie. The house was deeded to Joseph and me, with Garland inheriting. Yes, he had the right to sell the house after my death, but not while I was alive. As for the car, the old Ford was always registered to me. Garland, I began, trying to speak calmly, though I was seething with anger and resentment. You can't sell the house without my consent, he snorted. I can, Mom. I consulted a lawyer. After Dad signed everything over to me. That's it. He thinks Joseph signed the house over to him. Apparently he found some papers, but not the ones in the envelope I took with me. Where are you now? He asked suddenly. I called home, but you didn't answer. I'm at the hospital, I answered dryly. For the checkup I told you about yesterday. There was a pause, and for a moment I thought Garland felt a prick of conscience, but his next words dispelled that illusion. Oh, right. How is your health? Fine, I answered, surprised at how calm my voice was. The doctor said my heart is stronger than many people younger than me. Glad to hear it, he said without much enthusiasm. Anyway, about the house. I've already found a buyer. The deal's practically closed. You'll have to sign a couple of papers, but that's just a formality. Garland, I said firmly, I'm not signing anything. What? His voice got higher. Mom, don't start. The house is too big for you alone. It's just not sustainable. Octavia and I found you a great apartment in Pine Ridge. It's a senior center. I'm not moving into a nursing home, Garland, I interrupted him. And I'm not signing the papers to sell the house. It's not a nursing home. He was outraged. It's a state-of-the-art apartment complex with medical staff and… No, I said firmly. There was silence, and then Garland spoke in a different tone, cold and calculating. Mom, you don't understand. It's already done. I'm acting in your best interests. You need supervision, and Octavia and I need the money from the sale of the house. We'll all be better off. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. 40 years I've indulged this man. 40 years of giving in, excusing, forgiving. And now he was repaying me with betrayal, not even bothering to pretend he was thinking of my welfare. Okay, I said, surprised at my own calm. But you're forgetting one thing. What do you mean? He sounded worried. I laughed out loud, feeling a strange release. For years I had dreaded this moment, the moment when my son would finally betray me. And now it had come, but instead of despair, I felt almost relief. You forget, Garland, that you don't own the house outright. What nonsense is that? He shouted. Dad signed it over to me before he died. No, I said calmly. Your father was wiser than you think. He knew what you'd become, and he took action. What are you talking about? There was a note of panic in his voice. I took out the envelope I'd kept in my bag all these years and opened it carefully. Inside were the documents, the same ones Joseph had mentioned before he died. Your father deeded part of the house to Tessa, I said, looking through the papers. 25% belongs to your daughter. What? Garland exploded. That's impossible. When did he do it? A month before he died, I said, flipping through the pages of the will. It's all perfectly legal. It's signed by him, the notary, and the witnesses. But Tessa is a minor, Garland objected. Her share is still under my control. And then I saw what Joseph must have been talking about when he mentioned insurance. The papers clearly stated that until Tessa came of age, a court-appointed guardian would manage her share of the house. And there was a recommendation that I, the grandmother, be appointed as such a guardian in the event that her parents were unable to fulfill their duties properly. Not exactly, I said, feeling a smile spread across my face. You see, Joseph had made provisions for that too. There's a clause here that appoints a guardian to manage Tessa's share, and that guardian is me. That doesn't make sense. Garland's voice shook with anger. You're not Tessa's guardian. I'm her father. Not yet, I agreed. But I filed for custody 3 months ago, and I guess after the court finds out that you tried to sell the house your daughter has a legal interest in without the guardian's knowledge. Why the hell did you file for custody? He yelled so loudly that the nurse looked worriedly in my direction. I gave her a reassuring gesture and stepped farther away. Because Claire was back in rehab, Garland. For the 3rd time in 2 years. Because I've seen you leave Tessa alone all weekend. Because my granddaughter deserves better. How do you know about Claire? His voice was quieter but angrier. She called me, I answered. Unlike you, Claire understands that Tessa needs stability. And she agreed that guardianship was the best option until she got better. And you didn't even notice her absence, did you? Too busy with Octavia and plans to sell your mom's house. You planned the whole thing, Garland hissed. You and your father, always setting a trap for me. I sighed. No, Garland. We just knew you better than you think. Knew that one day you'd do exactly what you did today. I'll challenge that, he said threateningly. I'll prove that you're incompetent. That you manipulated your father before he died. Your father was of sound mind, I interrupted him. There are medical reports and witnesses. As for my capacity, Dr. Riley just confirmed that I'm in perfect health. So good luck with that. There was a heavy silence. I could almost physically feel Garland trying to find a way out of the situation, calculating his options. What now? He finally asked. You're going to ruin my life over some old house? His words hit me like a slap. Some old house. The house that Joseph and I put our hearts into. The house where Garland himself grew up. The house that has witnessed all of our family history, both good and bad. No, Garland, I said quietly. I'm going to protect what belongs to your daughter, what you so carelessly tried to take from her. And if it ruins your life, well, that's your choice, not mine. Tessa won't even know, he said with menace in his voice. I'll forbid you to see her. It's too late, I said. Tessa already knows. Not about your plans to sell the house, of course. But that Grandpa left her part of the house. I told her last weekend, when you were too busy to spend time with your own daughter. You had no right. She had a right to know, I said firmly. And she's a lot smarter than you think. She knew right away why Grandpa did it. I could hear Garland breathing heavily into the tube. I knew him well enough to imagine what his face looked like now, flushed with rage, with that peculiar crease between his eyebrows that he had in moments of anger. "You're going to regret this," he finally said. "I'll find a way. You can't hide behind Claire's papers and illnesses forever." "Don't threaten me, Garland." My voice sounded suddenly firm. "I'm your mother and I deserve respect. If you want to act like an adult, then let's talk like adults. About what's best for Tessa, for you, for all of us. But if you continue to threaten and manipulate, I will defend myself with every means at my disposal." There was silence on the phone. Then I heard a woman's voice in the background. Apparently Octavia was asking what was going on. Garland answered her indistinctly. "We're not done yet," he finally told me. "I'll call you later." He hung up without waiting for my answer. I slowly put the phone away in my bag, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief that things were finally coming out. Anger at a son who could do that to his own mother. Sadness at the realization that Joseph had been right to foresee this turn of events. And a strange sense of release, as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying all these years had finally fallen from my shoulders. The nurse approached me with a concerned look. "Are you all right, Mrs. Thorne? You look upset." I smiled at her, genuinely, for the first time in a long time. "You know," I said, "I think I'm really all right. For the first time in years. Coming home from the hospital was an ordeal. All the way in the cab, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Garland. His words, 'I'm getting married tomorrow. Your car and house are sold. Goodbye,' still echoed in my head like an unpleasant noise. How could my own son do such a thing? Although, come to think of it, he had never been particularly caring about me, neither as a child nor as an adult. The cab driver, an older man about my age, cast concerned glances at me through the rearview mirror. I must have looked worse than I thought. "Rough day?" he asked when we stopped at a stoplight. "Not really," I replied with a fake smile. "You know what my wife says? Even the longest day ends." Eleanor is a wise woman. I nodded, unable to keep up the conversation. My thoughts revolved around my upcoming meeting with Garland. What would I tell him? How would I explain that I'd known about his plans to sell the house but hadn't tried to stop him until the last moment? That Joseph saw this betrayal coming and took action? As the cab pulled up to my house, I saw Garland's black BMW parked in the driveway. That meant he was already here. My heart sped up, but not from fear, from determination. Today was the day I'd finally put things right. "Wait a minute," I said to the cabbie as I paid. "Please don't leave. I don't know how long my conversation with my son will last." He nodded understandingly, and I walked slowly toward the house. An old woman with a cane isn't the most formidable figure, but I had the truth behind me, and the legal documents proving that Garland couldn't dispose of the house without my consent. Opening the door with my key, I entered the house and immediately heard voices from the living room. Garland wasn't alone. "And these curtains are awful," said a woman's voice with a hint of contempt. "The first thing we'll do is replace them with something modern." "Of course, dear," Garland replied in that special tone of voice he reserved for women. Soft, supple, not at all like the way he spoke to me. "You can do whatever you want with the house as soon as we buy it." "Buy it? They're gonna buy my house?" I coughed, making my presence known, and walked into the living room. Garland was sitting on my couch next to Octavia, a slender brunette in her mid-30s, dressed like she was going to a photo shoot for a fashion magazine, not visiting her future mother-in-law. Across from them sat a middle-aged man with a briefcase in his lap, apparently a realtor or lawyer. "Mom!" Garland jumped up, his face a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "We weren't expecting you so early." "Obviously," I replied dryly, glancing around the strange company in my living room. "What's going on here, Garland?" The man with the briefcase stood up and held out his hand to me. "Mrs. Thorne? It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Edward Clark, a representative of Prime Estate. Your son told me about your desire to sell the house." "Really?" I didn't shake your hand. "I'm afraid my son misled you. I have no desire to sell my house." There was an awkward silence in the room. Edward looked from me to Garland, clearly not sure what was going on. "Mom?" Garland came over to me and tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. "Let's discuss this in the kitchen. Alone." "No." I shook my head. As long as we're all here, let's just dot the I's and cross the T's right now. Octavia straightened up on the couch, her perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line. Edward looked like he wanted to fall through the ground. Perhaps I'd better come back another day, he began. Stay, Mr. Clark, I said firmly. You should hear what I'm about to say, too. I pulled an envelope of papers out of my bag and placed it on the coffee table. This house is not for sale, I said, looking directly at Garland. Not today, not tomorrow, not any time in the foreseeable future. It belongs to me and Tessa. Tessa? Octavia asked, frowning. What does that have to do with the child? Garland gave her a warning glance, but it was too late. My granddaughter Tessa owns 25% of this house, I explained. In the will of her grandfather, my late husband Joseph. Edward Clark looked confused. Mr. Thorne, you didn't mention another co-owner. Because there can't be, Garland exploded. Dad signed the house over to me before he died. I saw the deed. You saw the draft, I said calmly. The final will is here, I pointed to the envelope. And it clearly states that a quarter of the house belongs to Tessa, and that I am her legal guardian, and I'm her legal guardian until she comes of age. Octavia stood up abruptly. This is some kind of a trap, she said, looking at Garland. You said there would be no trouble with the house. It won't be. Garland tried to look confident, but I could see the muscle in his cheek twitching, a sure sign that he was nervous. It's a misunderstanding. Mom just doesn't understand. I understand perfectly well, Garland, I interrupted him. And so will Mr. Clark when I show him the real will and guardianship papers. By the way, how's Claire doing? Have you been in touch with her lately? Garland's face contorted at the mention of his ex-wife. Don't you dare bring her into this. Who is Claire? Octavia asked demandingly. Garland's first wife and Tessa's mother, I explained. She's currently in treatment for addiction. Third time in 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. Edward Clark closed his briefcase with a determined click. I think I really should leave. Obviously, there are legal nuances here that need to be cleared up before we can move forward with the sale. There will be no sale, I said firmly. And if you've already made any prior agreements, I suggest you cancel them immediately. Mom, you can't do this. Garland stepped toward me, his full height looming over me. We already put down a deposit on a new house. It was all planned out. You should have talked to me first, I said, not backing down. Instead of trying to sell the house behind my back. I thought you'd be happy. This house is too big for you alone, you said so yourself. I never said I wanted to sell it, I countered. And I certainly wasn't going to move into a nursing home like you planned. It's not a nursing home, Garland exclaimed. It's a state-of-the-art assisted living facility. I don't need medical support, Garland. I pointed to the bag containing my medical report. Dr. Riley had just confirmed that I was in great shape for my age. Octavia walked over to Garland and put her hand on his shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look supportive but seemed possessive to me. Honey, maybe we should rethink our plans. If the house is so complicated— There are no complications, Garland said sharply. I'll take care of it. Mr. Clark cleared his throat to get our attention. With all due respect, there are definitely legal complications. If the minor child actually owns part of the property, and there is an appointed guardian— He shook his head. That's a very different situation than you've described, Mr. Thorne. I'm glad someone here is thinking rationally, I said, nodding to Edward. Thank you for understanding. Garland grabbed the papers off the coffee table. Let me see what's so special about this will. He flipped through the papers quickly, and I watched his expression change from anger to disbelief to shock as he read. It's a forgery, he finally said, but without the same confidence. Dad couldn't have done it. He did, I replied calmly. And the signatures of the notary and the witnesses confirm it. Joseph knew you could try to sell the house after his death without thinking about the consequences. He wanted to protect both me and Tessa. From me? Your own son? From your rash decisions, I corrected him. Octavia took the documents from Garland's hands and looked through them quickly. I could see her face change, a calculating expression she couldn't hide. It says here that 25% of the house belongs to Tessa, she said slowly. What about the other 75? 50 belongs to me, I answered. 25 belongs to Garland. That's what Joseph had said in his will. Garland looked like he'd been kicked in the butt. 25%? That's all my father left me? I sighed. He left you his share of the family business, Garland. You get to run the company he spent a lifetime building. The house was always important to me, so most of it was left to me. And little Tessa, of course, Octavia added with ill-concealed irritation. Yes, and Tessa, I confirmed. Joseph was very fond of his granddaughter. Edward Clark looked increasingly uncomfortable. I guess I really should be going. Mr. Thorne, if you would like to reopen the sale after the family issues have been settled, there will be no sale, I repeated firmly. And I'd appreciate it if you'd let potential buyers know that. Edward nodded and hurried out of the living room. I heard the front door slam. He clearly didn't want to be in the middle of a family scandal a second longer than necessary. Garland collapsed on the couch, covering his face with his hands. You've ruined everything, he muttered. All our plans, everything. I ruined it? I was outraged. You tried to sell my house without telling me, and you called me at the hospital with an announcement about the wedding and the sale, like it was some small thing. I was trying to do what was best, shouted Garland, jumping up from the couch. Better for whom, Garland? For yourself and your new wife? Octavia stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. Don't you dare talk as if I were some kind of fortune hunter. I love your son. I looked at her appraisingly. You do? For how long? 6 months now, she said defiantly. 6 months, I repeated thoughtfully. And in that time you've never once asked me if I wanted to sell my house? Not once did you ask me how I felt about the idea of moving into a medically assisted living facility? Octavia opened her mouth to reply, but Garland beat her to it. Stop pressuring Octavia. This is my decision, not hers. A decision that affects my life and your daughter's life, I reminded him. A decision you made without consulting me or Tessa. Tessa is a child, Garland said. She doesn't understand these things. She's a lot smarter than you think, I countered. And she loves this house. She has her own room here. She feels safe here. Here she can be herself, not what you and Octavia want her to be. Octavia snorted. Tessa is a spoiled child with behavioral problems. She needs discipline, not indulgence. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. My granddaughter is a smart, creative girl trying to cope with the fact that her mother can't take care of her and her father is too busy with his new life. Don't you dare talk about Tessa like that, Garland bellowed. But there was no real defense of his daughter in his voice, only irritation at being pointed out for his parental shortcomings. Someone has to think of her, Garland, I said more calmly. And if it's me, so be it. You're not taking Tessa away from me, Garland hissed. I'm not going to take her away from you. I want to be sure that her interests are protected, all interests, including her share in this house. Octavia went to the window and looked out into the street, as if assessing the view, or perhaps estimating the value of the lot. When she turned around, her face was calm and calculating. Garland, honey, maybe we should look at other options. This house is clearly carrying too much emotional baggage. I couldn't help but admire her coolness. She was quickly rearranging her plans, realizing there would be no easy prey. Garland looked at her with desperation. But we'd already put down a deposit on the new house. It was all planned out. Octavia shrugged her shoulders with feigned indifference. Sometimes plans change. After all, we're only talking about 25% of the property. I saw the look of understanding on Garland's face. Octavia wasn't interested in him, but in his supposed inheritance. A house that would make a substantial profit when it was sold. I have a proposition, I said, breaking the heavy silence. Either you cancel the deal and we forget about this unpleasant episode, or I'll call in the lawyers and start the formal process of gaining full custody of Tessa. It's your choice. You're blackmailing me with my own daughter? Garland looked shocked. No, I'm giving you a choice, I replied calmly. You can respect my rights and your daughter's rights, or we'll settle this in court. Which do you prefer? Garland shifted his gaze from me to Octavia, who was now standing with her arms crossed over her chest, her whole demeanor showing her displeasure. We need to think about it, he said at last. This is a big decision. Sure, I agreed. You have until tomorrow. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to rest. It had been a tiring day. Octavia was the first to leave, not hiding her irritation. Garland followed her but turned around at the threshold. You are being cruel, Mother, he said reproachfully. After all I've done for you. I gave him a long look. What exactly have you done for me, Garland? You don't call much, you don't visit much. You tried to sell the house I live in without consulting me. You refused to let me see my granddaughter more than once every 2 weeks. So please remind me, what have you done for me? Garland opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to find an answer. Finally, he just shook his head and walked out, slamming the door loudly. I was alone in the living room, feeling a strange mixture of devastation and triumph. For the first time in years, I had stood up to Garland without succumbing to his manipulations. It was a liberating feeling, but also frightening. What would happen next? How would Garland react? And what would happen to Tessa caught between us? But one thing I knew for sure, I would no longer be silent and patient. For my own sake, for Joseph's memory, and for Tessa's future. After the confrontation with Garland, I felt devastated but strangely free. All my life I had avoided conflict, especially with my son. Joseph had often told me that I was too soft on Garland, that one day it would backfire on me. As always, my husband was right. The next morning I decided not to wait for Garland's response, but to act on my own. The first thing I did was call Griffin Peck, an old family friend and attorney who had helped Joseph with the will and deeds to the house. Griffin was one of the few people I could call a true friend. We met back in the 70s when he was just starting his practice, and Joseph and I were opening our first flower store. He helped us with legal matters, often for a nominal fee or a bouquet of flowers for his wife. Over the years, our friendship only grew stronger. Griffin was there for us when Garland was born, when we were buying a house in Greendale, when Joseph was dying of cancer. To my relief, Griffin agreed to meet with me that afternoon. At 11 o'clock, I was already sitting in his office, a small but cozy space on the second floor of an old building in downtown Greendale. The walls were hung with diplomas and family photos, some of them of Joseph. They often went fishing together. Griffin, despite his 69 years, looked trim and alert. His once red hair had turned completely gray, but his eyes retained the same sharp, attentive look. Miriam, he stood up to embrace me. It's so good to see you. Though judging by your voice on the phone, it's not a very pleasant occasion, is it? I sighed and sat down in the chair across from his desk. Garland's trying to sell the house. Griffin frowned. Without your consent, it's impossible. He thinks it's possible, I replied, pulling out an envelope of papers. Remember this will? The one Joseph made a month before he died? Griffin nodded, taking the papers. Of course I do. We spent a good deal of time thinking about every clause. Joseph was very concerned about what would happen to you and Tessa. He looked over the papers, nodding to himself. It's all in order. 50% of the house belongs to you, 25% to Garland, 25% to Tessa, with you as guardian of her share. Garland can't sell the house without your consent. The problem is, I said, he's already found a buyer and put down a deposit on a new house, and he's sure he can outbid me. Griffin took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I knew well. It was what he always did when he was confronted with someone's stupidity or stubbornness. Well, legally his position was untenable, but knowing Garland. He paused for a moment, searching for words. He might try to challenge your right to custody of Tessa's share, or even claim that you're incapacitated. I nodded. That's what I thought. He'd already hinted at something like that yesterday. Griffin straightened, and I could see the determination in his eyes that made him such a good lawyer. Don't worry about it, Miriam. Do you have a medical certificate of good health? And custody papers? I nodded and handed him a folder of papers. I just had a full physical yesterday. Dr. Riley says I'm in great shape for my age. And the guardianship papers. Claire has agreed to a temporary guardianship while she undergoes treatment. This is the third time in 2 years. Griffin scrutinized the papers, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. It all looks very convincing, Miriam. Legally, Garland doesn't stand a chance, but... He looked at me with concern. You know your son. He could make this process very unpleasant. Are you ready for that? I wondered. All my life I'd avoided conflict with Garland, giving in to him in every way to keep the peace. But this wasn't just about me. It was about Tess. It was about the house my granddaughter loved. It was about Joseph's last wish. I'm ready, I said firmly. I wouldn't give in this time. Griffin nodded approvingly. Then here's what we'll do. I'll draft a formal letter to the prospective buyers, notifying them of your opposition to the sale and the legal complications. That should cool their appetite. Then we'll draw up the necessary paperwork to make your custody of Tessa's share more permanent. And we'll prepare for a possible lawsuit just in case. I breathed a sigh of relief. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in this fight. Thank you, Griffin. I don't know how to thank you. He gave me a warm, fatherly smile. You and Joseph have always been like family to me, Miriam. And I promised him I'd take care of you. I'm just keeping my promise. We discussed details for a while longer, and I told him about Garland's strange phone call, about his sudden announcement of the wedding and the sale of the house, about Octavia, who seemed interested only in the material side of things. I don't want to speak ill of a woman I barely know, Griffin said cautiously, but I find this situation suspicious. Garland has always been impulsive, but this… He shook his head. Be careful, Miriam, and keep me informed. I promised, and after saying goodbye to Griffin, I left the office feeling like I had a strong ally. Now I had to meet the most important person in this story, Tessa. Tessa's school was a 15-minute walk from Griffin's office. I decided not to call Garland and warn him of my visit. After last night's conversation, he might have forbidden me to see my granddaughter. Instead, I arrived right at the end of class and waited at the gate. When the bell rang, the children poured out of the school building like peas out of a pod, noisy, lively, happy. I noticed Tessa walking with two other girls, carrying a backpack decorated with animal badges. Her dark hair was pulled back into a casual ponytail, and she had a smile on her face, the same smile that reminded me so much of Joseph. Grandma? She was surprised to see me. What are you doing here? I hugged her, breathing in the smell of baby shampoo and school crayons. I thought I'd surprise you. How about we go to the cafe and get some ice cream? Tessa's eyes lit up, but then she frowned. Does Daddy know? He doesn't usually let me. Today's a special day, I said with a smile. I'll take full responsibility. Tessa hesitated for a moment, then nodded and waved goodbye to her friends. Let's go to Sweetums. They have the best ice cream. We went to a small cafe not far from the school. I remembered this place from when I used to take little Garland there. It had a different name then, a simple diner, but now it was a fancy ice cream parlor with fancy flavors and names. Tessa ordered a huge bowl of chocolate chip, whipped cream, and caramel. I limited myself to a small ball of vanilla. As I got older, I found sweets sugary, though when I was younger I could eat an entire box of chocolates in one sitting. What's wrong, Grandma? Tessa asked, licking her spoon. You never pick me up from school for nothing. I smiled at her insight. Tessa had always been a bright girl. In that, she took after Joseph, who also had a remarkable intuition and ability to see through people. Do you remember what I told you about the house? About Grandpa leaving you part of it? Tessa nodded, suddenly serious. 25%, and you got 50, and Daddy got 25%. That's right. Do you know what that means? She thought for a moment. That the house is partly mine? That no one can sell it without our permission? I nodded, once again marveling at her cleverness. Exactly. Your dad wants to sell the house. Tessa stopped eating her ice cream. Her face stretched. But, it's our house. My room is there, and the garden, and the tree with the swing. I know, sweetie. I covered her little hand with mine. That's why I wanted to talk to you. Your dad thinks he can sell the house without my consent, and he doesn't know that you own part of the house. He hasn't asked me, Tessa said quietly. He never asks me anything. There was so much bitterness in her voice that my heart clenched. I knew the feeling of being invisible to my own family. Your dad's very busy, I said automatically, then faltered. How many times had I said that phrase? How many times had I justified Garland to my daughter the way I'd justified him to Joseph before? But that doesn't mean your opinion doesn't matter, I added firmly. Tessa looked at me carefully. This is about her, isn't it? It's Octavia. She keeps saying the house is old and needs to be sold. I nodded, not wanting to lie to the child. Partly. But it's your daddy's decision, not hers. I don't want to move, Tessa said firmly. And I don't want them to get married. I sighed. As much as I wasn't thrilled with Octavia, I didn't want to turn Tessa against her father or his fiancée. Sometimes adults make decisions we don't like, I said carefully. But in the case of the house, you have a say. And I will defend that right. Tessa perked up a little. Really? You won't let them sell our house? I'll do my best, I promised. But I need your help. What kind of help? I need you to be honest with your dad. Tell him how you feel about the house and the move, but do it calmly without tantrums or accusations. Adults listen better when children talk reasonably. Tessa snorted, such a grown-up, cynical sound coming out of a 12-year-old's mouth. Dad doesn't listen to me no matter what I say. He always says, "Later, Tessa," or "Not now, I'm busy." Those words echoed painfully in me. How many times had I heard the same thing from Garland? Later, Mom. Not now, I'm busy. As if Tessa and I were an annoying nuisance in his important life. Then we'll have to make him listen, I said with a determination that surprised me. Because your grandfather wanted us to keep this house. He wanted you to always have a home to come back to. Tessa's eyes filled with tears. I miss my grandpa. Me too, honey. Every day. We sat in silence for a while. Tessa's ice cream began to melt, forming a colorful puddle at the bottom of the bowl. Grandma, she finally said, is it true you were a florist? I smiled, surprised at the change of subject. I was. I had my own flower store, Floral Fantasy. I sold it 6 years ago after my grandfather died. Why did you become a florist? I wondered. No one had asked me that question in a very long time. Even Garland never seemed interested in why I'd chosen it. I've always loved flowers, I began. When I was a little girl, even younger than you, my grandmother grew roses. She had a beautiful garden, and she taught me how to take care of the flowers, how to make bouquets. It was like magic to make something beautiful out of simple plants, something that could make people happy, bring them comfort, or express love. Tessa listened to me with bated breath. When I met your grandfather, I was working in a small flower store on the outskirts of town. He came in to buy a bouquet for his mom for her birthday. He was so confused he didn't know which flowers to choose. I smiled at the memory. I made him a bouquet of pink peonies and white lilies. He said it was the most beautiful bouquet he'd ever seen. He came back a week later, ostensibly to get flowers again, but really to ask me out. That's so romantic, Tessa sighed. Yes, your grandfather was a romantic. When we married, he helped me open my own store. He worked overtime at his day job so we had money to rent a place and buy our first flowers. I was so happy among my roses, tulips, lilies. And then Daddy was born? Tessa asked. I nodded. Yes, 2 years after the store opened. I worked almost until I gave birth. I didn't want to close the store even for a day. And then when your daddy was little, I used to take him with me a lot. He had his own corner where he would play while I made bouquets and served customers. Daddy never told me about that, Tessa said thoughtfully. He probably doesn't remember, I replied, though I knew Garland did. He just chose to forget the days when he was just a little boy, the son of a florist and a middle manager, not a successful businessman with a claim to high status. Can I try to make a bouquet someday? Tessa asked enthusiastically. Would you teach me? I felt my heart grow warm. All these years I thought no one was interested in my past, my skills, my life before I was just Garland's mom, or Tessa's grandmother. And now, in this little cafe, my granddaughter was looking at me with genuine interest and a desire to learn more. Of course I will, I promised. Next weekend when you come to see me, we'll go to the flower market and pick out flowers for your first bouquet. Tessa's face lit up with a happy smile. At that moment, I suddenly realized that for too long I'd been living up to other people's expectations, giving in, fitting in, trying to please everyone. First my parents, then Joseph, though he'd never asked me to give in, then Garland. There was always someone whose wants and needs I put before my own. But now, looking at Tessa, I could feel a new resolve awakening in me. I would fight for our home, for Tessa's right to her inheritance, for my own right to live the way I wanted, not the way others wanted. Grandmother, Tessa interrupted me. You're not going to let Papa and Octavia kick us out of the house, are you? I took her hand and squeezed it tightly. No, Tessa, I won't let them do that. I promise. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could keep that promise. That I had the strength and the right to stand up for what was important to me and my granddaughter. That after decades of giving in, I was finally ready to stand up for myself. Garland and Octavia's wedding took place a week after we spoke. I received the invitation at the last minute 2 days before the ceremony, printed on cheap paper and delivered by regular mail. The ceremony was at a small restaurant on the outskirts of Greendale. I almost decided not to go, but then Tessa called and begged me to come. Please, Grandma, I can't stand it alone. Daddy's making me wear that awful pink dress Octavia picked out. For Tessa's sake, I agreed. A lot has happened in the past week. Griffin sent a formal letter to potential buyers, notifying them of my opposition to the sale and the legal complications. It didn't take long to get a reaction. The very next day, Garland called me in a rage. What have you done? The Taylors are backing out of the deal. I remained calm, even though my insides were trembling from the unfamiliar conflict. I warned you, Garland. The house cannot be sold without my consent. I sat in the small restaurant, watching the modest ceremony. Tessa stood next to her father and Octavia in a pink dress and looked like she was ready to run away. After the ceremony, there was a small reception. I stayed out of the way, but I noticed Octavia taking Garland to the window. Even from a distance, I could tell the conversation was tense. Grandma, Tessa ran up to me. You have no idea what just happened. Tessa said that she had overheard Octavia on the phone saying that the house plan had fallen through and that she didn't sign up to live in a rented apartment with a child from her first marriage. I don't want to live with them, Tessa said. Can I live with you? At that moment, I made a decision that had been maturing in me for a long time. Of course you can. I'll talk to your dad. The conversation with Garland wasn't easy, but in the end, he agreed that Tessa would live with me, while she and Octavia settled in. For how long? He asked suspiciously. A month, 2 months, until you get settled, I answered. Okay, but only for a month, Garland said. But I knew that once Tessa moved in with me, it would be hard to get her to go back to a house that didn't want her. 3 days later, Tessa moved in. The month stretched into 2, then 3. Garland called occasionally, sometimes picking up his daughter for the weekend, but it was obvious that his new life with Octavia was taking up all his time. 4 months after the wedding, he called me in the middle of the night. I could tell from his voice that he was drunk. She was gone. Octavia's gone, he said without preamble. What happened? You were right. She wanted the house, the money, the status, not me, and certainly not Tessa. After that, Garland started calling Tessa more often. Sometimes they talked for hours. I stayed out of it, giving them space to rebuild their relationship. One morning at breakfast, Tessa said, You know, Grandma, I'm glad things worked out the way they did. That Daddy couldn't sell the house, that you wouldn't let him, that we're living here together now. I nodded. I'm glad too, Tessa. I think Grandpa would be pleased, she added, because he loved this house, and you, and wanted us to be okay. Garland lost his house, lost his wife, but maybe in the process he began to find himself. And I finally found my voice and the strength to stand up for what was important to me. At 68, I began a new chapter of my life, with Tessa by my side and with the hope that one day Garland would also find his way back to us. The irony of life is that what started as Garland's attempt to rid himself of his mother and her house ended with himself without a house and without a wife who loved only his supposed wealth. But for me, it was a liberation. From fear, from toxic relationships, from constant giving in. I was finally starting to live for myself and for Tessa, not for Garland and his expectations. How about we go to the flower market? I suggested to Tessa. I promised to teach you how to make bouquets. We left the house on a clear spring morning. The maple trees Garland had planted when he was a boy rustled with young leaves. The house that Joseph and I had built with such care stood strong and secure. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I no longer feared it. For the first time in years, I felt truly free, and it was worth it.